Hello, I'm David Swinowski with Rubble Road Soapstone Kits, and today I'm going to work on the Small Cat. So this is a kit that we typically take into schools and teach in the classroom. Today I'm going to do a tutorial on how I'm going to finish this piece of soapstone with 3 pieces of sandpaper. So if you want to move in a little bit closer, I'll show you exactly how we work with this piece of stone. Alright, so here we have the Small Cat. Piece of soapstone silhouette, so soft, we can scratch that just with our thumbnail. That's how soft this rock is. We have a little bit of water here to help control the dust, minimize our mess. I'm just gonna put that rock right in there. We're gonna be shaping this stone and finishing it with 3 pieces of sandpaper. We're gonna start off with a 60 grit mesh. Sandpaper number 2 is a 320 grit. And the very final piece of sandpaper is a 600 grit. So we aren't going to need any of these for a little bit, so we're going to put those off on the side. To do my shaping, I use the 60 mesh. It's also made for being used in the water. First thing I do is I actually fold that piece of sandpaper to give myself a ridge to do my shaping. So with the cat, first thing you should do is kind of decide which side of the stone you're going to put your patterns on. You know what? I'm going to put my patterns on this side right here. With the cat, let's take a look. We have the 2 ears up on top. It's kind of sitting really nicely. So what I like to do is create the leg lines for this cat, a neckline, and we're going to minimize that tail. We're going to carve that down lower. Same with the ears. One thing you have to remember when you're a stone carver, we're not adding any rock, we're only taking rock away. So if there are certain aspects of this shape that you want to stand out more, you pretty much need to leave them alone and carve the surrounding rock down. So we can start with, let's start with the neckline here. So I'm using that folded ridge right here. Small movements back and forth. Almost like a train on the track, we're gonna chew our way into this stone. You can just go with a pushing motion. Once you've got that groove kind of started, it's a little bit easier for the sandpaper to stay on the same path. So now I can push a little bit more pressure on the sandpaper and really dig that sandpaper into that stone. I really wanna make sure this line is bold. The reason is, if we don't put our patterns in the stone deeply enough, once we go to sandpaper number 2, if that groove or pattern isn't deep, sandpaper 2 will completely erase it. So we need to make sure any details we want on here are deep enough. With the soapstone as well, once you start carving here, it makes some dust for sure. So we want to trap that dust in the water. Your sandpaper as well is going to fill up with dust, making it less effective. You barely feel that grit. Let's rinse that out as well. Get that grit right back out so we can use it much more effectively. We have a good groove started on here. How deeply do we need to go into the stone? Well, we don't need to go halfway into the stone, but we definitely need to go, I would go, a good quarter of the way into the stone. We want to definitely be able to see that groove pattern that we're making if we want it to stay. If you should accidentally make a mistake, don't worry about it. As long as any little mistake you make, you don't keep making it again and again so it doesn't get deeper, we'll easily erase that with sandpaper number 2. So don't worry about any little mistakes you're making. Just make sure that the grooves and the lines that you do want are the ones that are the deeper ones. We don't want to go too far into the stone though either, because it is a softer rock. If we carve too deeply into that stone and there was only a tiny little bit of rock, soft rock left holding it together, it would be prone to breaking, and we don't want that either. But if you are going to be a stone carver, you will break some rocks here and there. It does happen. If that should happen with your piece of stone, just stop, let that carving dry, use some super glue, maybe an epoxy, glue those pieces back together, let the glue cure, and you can continue carving. So as you can see right now, line's nice and bold. I've got a pretty good depth in there. See, that's pretty close. I'm going to be pretty happy with that. And now I'm just trying to make sure that that groove is the same depth all the way across. That's all I'm doing right now. Rinse that out, take a good look at it. Looks okay. So I'll stick with that. I'm also going to minimize this tail, but I will leave that for now. That is one of the smallest parts of the carving itself, so we'll leave that for now. I'm also going to be rounding the top of the head here and recessing or setting those ears back a little bit. As I start to carve those further back, you can see how it kind of makes the face stick out a little bit more. That's really good. That's kind of what we're looking for, right? Create some depth on this piece. So I'm just going to carve those ears even further down. And if you want, you can also use this sandpaper to try and match those ears up. If you want them to be symmetrical and the same size. You know, not every single cutout is going to be exactly the same. It's part of the tooling process or the cutting. So if you want, you can shape those ears to get them close to the same size. So because we can't add any stone to the smaller one to make it larger, we have to make the larger one smaller. That's the only option we have. Slide that stone back a little bit further again. You don't want to make those ears too thin either. You want to leave a little bit of substance behind. I typically, for the smalls, concentrate my efforts onto one side. You can leave the opposing side flat. You can always carve your name. If you're in the classroom, you can also carve or put in the school year, your initials, so you can identify your work as your own and the year it was when you made it. So we will concentrate all of our carving efforts onto this one side today. And I will bring the neckline, I will carve it around to the sides, just to really help add that detail to the carving. Really help separate the different stages of this carving. We have the ears, the head, the neck. Necklines are really important on the critters. I find it really helps add some definition to that carving. Again, you don't want to make that neck too narrow. You want to leave a little bit of rock behind. We've definitely got the cat's head and ear set back. So now I'm going to work on those front legs. And you know, as it's sitting there, there should be 4 paws up on the front. So I'm going to create the middle of the leg line first. I pretty much pick the center of this stone, and that's where my first groove is going to go. Small movements back and forth. I don't want to make a groove from the very middle all the way down. I just kind of want to create those leg lines. So it's roughly about halfway up the separated body from the, you start from the top of the neck, or sorry, the bottom of the neck to the bottom of the cat. It's about that halfway mark, and I go from there straight down. Constant contact, constant pressure, scrubbing that sandpaper into the stone. And because it's a metamorphic rock, You are going to get some variances in the hardness in this stone. They're not all going to be exactly the same. You've got less heat during its formation, less pressure. It's definitely going to be much softer. You'll be able to make these grooves a lot quicker, you know, 5 or 6 pushes maybe, and it'll be fine. Whereas with some of the other stones, it'll be a little bit harder, and you know, might take 20 or 30 scrubs to get that same groove in here. So with this particular cat that I have, the top of this cat is actually softer than the base. So I have 2 different hardnesses in this stone alone. You might be able to feel that as you're carving it. You might be able to tell. So again, just like the one up above, I just want to try and make sure that this groove is deep enough so that I don't have to worry about erasing it with sandpaper number 2. I'm going to also put grooves on the sides. So here we have what are essentially going to be the front 2 legs. Now we have to make the back 2 legs, which are going to be on the side. So we have to split each side in half. Roughly the same height as this front one. Can be a little bit lower. And if you find that your sandpaper isn't working quite as effectively as it was when you first started, you can always open it up, refold that sandpaper in a new spot to bring yourself some fresh new grit, and that should work a little better for you. I'm doing my best to try and stay on the same line. I'm trying to center it up, so I use really small movements to start until I get that little groove made. Once that groove is there, it'll help hold my sandpaper in place a little better for me, and I can be a little bit more aggressive with pushing down on that. And then another groove over on this side. And then for these 3 lines, we now have the 4 legs of our cat. Let's carve those side ones a little bit deeper. That center one is probably going to be the deepest out of those 3 grooves for me. And now that we have those, now we're going to create those little paws on the bottom by turning our carving sideways. How big are those paws going to be? You have to decide. I want those paws to be about that big, personally. That's how big I want their toes to be. So I'm going to use my sandpaper here. Just carve a straight line all the way across those 4 feet. If you want, you can line it up with the bottom of the tail. It's always something you can do. You can just use that as a straight line and carve that into the stone. Same as the other grooves, repeating until that groove is deep enough into the stone where we don't have to worry about erasing it with sandpaper number 2. Lots of rinsing, trap that dust in the bucket, keep it in the water. Not bad. Definitely got 3 grooves. We have those 4 little feet down there. It's pretty good. So the only way to get those toes to stick out, because it's all one level right now, it's all flat right across here, we need to carve down on the upper half, or on the upper portion of the body of that cat. So we're going to carve into there and just scrub that down without touching those toes. I'll leave those little toes alone. And as you're doing this, your sandpaper is still going to fill up with dust. Let's rinse that out, trap all that dust in the bucket, and go right back to it. Now, how much do I get rid of? That depends on how much you want those little toes to stick out. As we carve down, that's what's gonna make those toes kind of stick out a little bit more. We'll bring it back a little bit further. And we'll also be carving that tail further down, so it's okay if you also scrub across the tail and carve that down as well. That's fine. Rinse it out. And as we're doing this, we might be erasing those lines that we made for the limbs. That's okay, because we know where we put them before. We can just put them right back in there again. Same way. Now, if we're going to be a little bit more realistic on this, technically the two middle legs should be closer to you than the side legs. So we could carve those little toes on the sides down a little bit, just to help make the front ones a little bit more raised than those back paws. So just down a little bit. Turn this cat around, do the same on the other side. If you need to, just carve those little notches back in. So you might need to refold that sandpaper again to give yourself a nice fresh edge to help create those little lines on the side above those paws. I'll flip this around, use that other edge. That's not too bad. You can see how the two middle feet are higher than two little edge paws. That's good. So now on the cat sitting, we could also start to round off the top of the body up here. We're just going to start by scrubbing right on those blocky corners. Get rid of those blocky edges on both sides. And what this is going to do is going to taper the upper body so that when it kind of narrows here, then the head's going to flare out from there. So it'll give us a lot of definition, a lot of depth on this piece. Fold your sandpaper up even smaller if you want to make it a smaller rectangle to really fit in here. And it also kind of stiffens that sandpaper up so so it works a little better for you. Rounding off those square blocky edges. And now if we think about these outside legs, the cat's hips should be roughly at that halfway mark. So if we carve into the sides of the body, just to kind of bring that little hip out on the side here. And then we're going to want to do the same on the opposite side. So if you want, you can kind of use your straighter edge that's folded on that sandpaper, give you an idea where you're going to go, and just work on it. Just like you did the other side. It doesn't need to be super deep, just enough to kind of give you a little edge there. Then we're going to round that. Chest of the cat all the way around here. How far are you going to bring them in? Well, you can bring those hip lines really close to the grooves that you carved for the front legs, like right on those lines right there. Bring it right in. So you have the front legs in the middle and then the two back legs on the side. And if we bring those little hips in to those two outer lines, I think it'll be pretty good. And then right where it meets up with that line, if you want to bring that little, and open this up just so I have a thinner ridge to work with. I'm also going to bring that hip, I'm just going to kind of drag that over and into the hip line, into that front leg line on both sides. Right over and then join it right into that leg line. From the hip into the leg. From the hip into the leg line. And that's really going to help give you the definition for the back hips. We can help with those front legs as well. So for the front two legs, I find it's almost like a Y shape from the chest of the cat. So I'm also going to just make almost like a Y groove at the very top. And there's that Y in the middle. I'm going to just carve that groove in a little bit. Just deep enough so I know I'm not going to erase it with sandpaper number 2. And that's what kind of funnels the chest into those front legs. And we have the back legs here. Tail still about the same thickness as this other side here. That's okay, we'll get to that. Now we're going to work on the face. The nose of that cat should stick out a little bit more. So if we could almost point the face a little bit more, just to kind of create that shape of a pointier face. And I'm going to try not to touch the ear. So again, I've got my sandpaper folded up to make it a little bit thicker. But it's also going to be a little bit sturdier. And I'm just going to work from the side towards the center of the face. So I'm kind of angling both sides towards the face here, towards the center of the face. So I want to try and create that pointy look. If you need to, you can carve that neckline a little bit deeper to give you a little bit more ability to point that face even a little bit more. You can see I'm really starting to angle the face here. And those sides up towards the center, same on the bottom corners here. Trying to point them all towards the center. I'm not really touching the top of the forehead here. I'm kind of leaving that one for now because I don't want to contact the ears. I want to leave those alone. So I'm mostly working from the edges and the bottom up towards the top. You can round off the head a little bit on those top eyebrow ridges if you want to. Rounding that face. Rounding those edges right off. Try and stay away from those ears right now. Because we left a little extra around the neck, that's what allows us to kind of carve into that neck a little bit more to allow us to round that face off a little bit more. As you can see, as I hold it sideways, it definitely sticks out more on the chest of the cat, tapers down towards the toes pop out a little bit. Of I've carved into the neckline so the head pops out a little bit more, the face, and then the ears are set back a little bit as well. Round off the size of the hips a little bit. Round off that stone. Come into the chest. Making sure that Y has got some depth to it. In the center of the chest. Now if you wanted to, you could leave that little flat spot in the center of the face, because you could always use a nail or a pointy piece of steel, and you could always draw some little whiskers or a little nose on there as well if you wanted to in lines after you have finished oiling this piece of stone. And then they would just stick out like little white lines on there. They'd look really great as the whiskers. Going to make these little side feet stick out a little bit more. Round off those edges as well. Try and get rid of a lot of the square blocky edges on the stone. So now we're going to carve the tail down a little bit to help this left side hip stick out a little bit more. So we're just going to kind of follow along the same line as that hip and then just carve that tail straight down. That's it. Fold that sandpaper up a bunch of times again, make it a little bit thicker, a little bit more rigid, so it does that work a little better for you. Just refining those paw lines a little bit as I'm working here. Now we don't want to make that tail too thin. We don't want to make it too small. We want to leave a little bit of stone there. The more stone that's there, the more stable and sturdy it is. Rinse that off. Going to round that tail off. So as we carve into that tail, what we can also do is we can bring this side, carve this down to also create a little bit of added dimension to the stone, to almost wrap that tail almost like it's coming around the front of the cat. So we will work on the back of the stone for just the back of the tail. I'm also going to round off those edges as well as I'm doing this. I don't want any square blocky edges, especially on that tail. So I'm not pushing too hard. working on the tail because it is a thinner piece of stone. I'm just kind of keeping a good contact on the stone itself with that sandpaper, and I'm pretty much letting that sandpaper do the brunt of the work. I'm not using too much pressure at all. Just rounding that tail off right now. That's pretty good. So we've got some definite depth on the tail. Little square on that hip, we can round that off. Just to get rid of that square blocky corner, right? So you can round those hips. On the sides of the cat. Not bad. I like it. So this is the general shape for this cat. Maybe just point that face just a little bit more. Not too much though. I want to try and keep the bulk of the stone on the head here. So I'm working from the bottom of the chin up. Point that face a little bit more. And just round that chest off a little bit more, just so it's not so flat across the top. We can just round that off a little bit. And if you should accidentally erase that little Y shape we have at the top of the chest, just put it back in once you're done shaping it. I'm pretty happy with that general shape. So if we take a closer look at it, we're noticing the colors coming out of the stone itself, wherever we've done some heavy duty shaping. But if we didn't do any shaping there, you might notice a little gray striping pattern in the stone. We want to make sure we get rid of that as well. That is from the bandsaw. That's a tooling mark. So if we want the natural color of this stone to come through, even if you don't really do any shaping on that section, you still want to give it a scuff with your sandpaper to really help that natural color coming through. And this isn't just on the one side. I'm even going to sand the side where I didn't do any work at all, the flat side. I want to see the natural color of this stone coming through. So if I only do a couple scrubs there, and I'll bring that up, you can see the color coming through, but there's that pattern, right? It's like a horizontal banding on this one. Could be vertical, could even be a little off to the side, but you want to make sure that you get rid of that striping pattern as much as you can. Little scratches left behind with your first sandpaper, that's okay. As long as you're the one that made those scratches, you're okay. When finishing a stone, it's kind of like having a picture that's out of focus. We're going to start to bring the colors and the little subtle mineral deposits and everything else that might be in the stone into a clearer picture here once we go to sandpaper 2. But sandpaper 1 is the most important one. It prepares the surface of your stone for sandpaper 2 because sandpaper 2 is going to get rid of the little scratches we've just left behind. There's no one sandpaper you're going to use to shape and smooth your stone. It's always a process, doesn't matter what rock you're carving. Nice thing with the Brazilian is because this stone is so soft, we only need 3 pieces of sandpaper to finish this particular piece. So I've worked all the thinner edges everywhere, the back, sides, top, a little bit on the bottom, just a light little scuff. You don't want to over sand. You just want to get rid of that tooling mark. That's it. So once I'm happy with my general shape, and I've gotten rid of all those tooling marks, and I'm happy with the way my carving looks, I can start going to sandpaper number 2. So sandpaper number 1, I take out of my bucket. Sandpaper 2, 320 grit, even has the number 2 on that piece of paper, so that's how you know it's sandpaper number 2. When you go to sandpaper number 2, you want to make sure you're not scrubbing your soapstone on the bottom of your bucket. And the reason is sandpaper number 1. You can see all the crease lines on my sandpaper here. All the grit has worn off of those crease lines, and it's now at the bottom of my bucket. This is silicon carbide. It's harder than the rock we're carving right now. So if we're scrubbing our soft soapstone against those gritty little pieces down there, they will be putting little scratches back into your carving. So you want to make sure you're just dipping your rock in the water when you're rinsing it off. With the sandpaper, if you see writing on there, that side is just paper. Make sure you're scrubbing it with the opposite side. And sandpaper 2, I'm just going to sand the back of this cat just to kind of show you. It's really going to start to smooth this rock out. But sandpaper 2 gets rid of the little scratches you just left behind with sandpaper number 1. That's really going to start to bring out that natural color. So we also rinse this sandpaper out as well. But a couple good scrubs, take a look at it. You're really going to see that color coming through. All the little subtleties in that stone are coming through. What we're looking for now are tiny little scratches. Sandpaper 3 is not going to get rid of these scratches. So any scratches you don't want to see, they have to be gone before we go to sandpaper 3. So we're going to go all over this piece of stone, erasing all the little scratches we don't want. If you start to scrub it and smooth it, and those scratches are being stubborn because they're too deep, you can always quickly go back to sandpaper 1, use it to kind of lightly run it over and make those deeper scratches a little bit shallower so that you can easily erase them with sandpaper number 2. The thumb technique is my favorite for that, where I just take my sandpaper, push that sandpaper around with my thumb, and it's gone. You'd be shocked at how much strength you can get underneath your thumb in a concentrated area to get rid of stubborn scratches. So for all the little groove patterns we put in here, we can also fold up sandpaper number 2. So we can use this, tuck it into those grooves, so we can do the best possible job sanding. Bringing out as much of that natural color as we can. Lots of rinsing, especially when we're sanding. I don't do as much rinsing when I am carving it, but when I am sanding, I'm doing a ton of rinsing. That way, every time I rinse it, I can visually see any of the scratches or marks I need to get rid of. Gives me a great visual. So now, just trying to be consistent. You know, that's really what the sandpapers are all about. Consistency. Yes, sandpaper number one, we did some shaping with it, but we also want a consistent finish with that sandpaper. We want it about the same. We don't want any deeper scratches or shallower scratches or untouched areas. We want it all to have been scrubbed with that first bit of paper, first bit of sandpaper. We want all those scratches that are left to be roughly the same. Not too deep, not too shallow, just consistent. Making sure I'm not scrubbing it on the bottom of my bucket. Every time I rinse my stone, I'm going to rinse my sandpaper as well. I want my sandpaper as clean and as fresh as possible for the duration of my time using it. Lots of rinsing. You can use your eyes to see if there's any scratches that are left behind, or you can also use your hands because the texture is definitely different from sandpaper 1 to sandpaper 2. So you can also just use your hands and texturally feel as well if there's any spots that you need to get at. Got a little stubborn scratch underneath that tail, so I'm just using my thumb technique to get at it. Goes. Flatten that little side paw a little bit more. Now that I'm working on a little bit larger area on the front here, I'm just going to open my sandpaper up. Now that it's been soaking for a while, it's a lot more pliable and easily form and shape to the stone. Just use the finger, fits in between those ears, and just scrub that back and forth. Trying to get in on all those edges as best I can. Always staying above my bucket. As the stone is getting smoother, it also gets a little bit slipperier at the same time. So if I accidentally drop it, I'd rather drop it in my bucket of water than on the floor beside me. So I like to try and stay above my bucket as much as possible. Good rinse. Taking a look right now, I'm really close to finish with sandpaper 2, so now I'm just giving it good rinses. Just double checking, making sure I'm not leaving any big scratches at all behind. Making sure I'm getting rid of all the marks I don't want right now. And once I'm happy with that, I can go to sandpaper number 3. And just give it one more quick once over, just to really smooth that existing surface, really almost down to glass. I'm pretty happy with that. Sandpaper 2 goes out. Sandpaper 3, which is the 600 grit, goes in. Again, if you see writing on that side, that's just paper. Make sure you're scrubbing your stone with the opposite side. Really making sure not to touch the bottom of the bucket with your soapstone carving right now. Give the one side 15, 20 scrubs. Feel it, that should feel like glass. Color's really out. Really seeing the natural beauty of that stone right now. Really nice. Really nice. Got some different shades of brown in here. Black blotches in there. Really nice stone. Stone itself is from Brazil. So we're using the Brazilian soapstone here today, which worldwide is known for its softness, but also biggest color range. So for those of you carving a Rubble Road soapstone kit in the classroom, you should be seeing a bunch of different colors in there right now. We're just going to give this a quick once over. We were nice and consistent with sandpapers 1 and 2. Sandpaper 3 is the quickest one. Just a quick once over everywhere. Smooth that existing surface right out. And when we're completely finished, we're going to rinse it off in clean water to get this dusty water off of it, because it needs to be nice and clean and dry before the oil goes on. So I usually let it sit for 1 day. Make sure it's nice and dry before I add my oil. So fold this up, swing it into those grooves again. I think I'm pretty happy with this. Now it's time to rinse this stone off in clean water and start that drying process. I'm pretty happy. I like that cat. Some beautiful colors in there. The depth to that stone. We definitely got rid of some rock on here. I like it. I hope you like yours too. All right, so now that the soapstone has had time to dry, we're gonna do our oiling now. And I like to typically oil the back first. When I oil them, I like to lay them down. Standing them up, they could fall over, become damaged that way. So I typically like to lay them down when I am oiling. So starting with the back here, we're gonna spread that oil around with that Q-tip. Bring that natural color right back out. I'm just gonna make sure I'm going all the way around all the edges here. I usually lay down a paper towel, or if you have an old rag, you can lay that down too, just to keep the oil off the surface of the table. And then once I have the back, then I'll just flip it over so I can oil the front. Just making sure to get rid of all those little gray spots. Once I have finished oiling this, I like to let it sit for at least 2 hours before I wipe off any excess oil with the lint-free cloth. And then once you're done, you have yourself your very own finished soapstone carving. For those of you working on the cat, if you want to draw those whiskers on after you have finished oiling it, just even like a small nail or just a small piece of steel, something sharp, something pointy, just be careful if you're drawing it on there. And then if you accidentally make a mistake there, you can always just re-oil it and then try again. Sand it down if you need to. But turn that carving around, making sure you've got every corner. Looks great. And that's it. Nice oiled. I'm gonna let this sit for a couple hours before I wipe off the excess. All right, and there it is, the finished small cat. I hope you enjoyed carving it as much as I did. If you would like to see more of our tutorials and some of our other in-school field trip ideas, please like and subscribe our page. And I hope everybody enjoyed this tutorial on our small cat kit. Thank you very much. I'm David Spanowski with Rubble Soapstone Kits.